Here's something most men never fully realize. Attraction is not just about what you have, what you've achieved, or how many years you've lived. It's about how you carry those years. It's about the energy you bring into a moment, the way you speak, the way you look at someone, the way you exist without trying to prove anything. A lot of older men believe time automatically gives them an advantage, and in many ways it does. Experience sharpens judgment. Life teaches patience. Struggles build resilience. But here's the part that often goes unnoticed. Those advantages only matter if they are expressed correctly. If they are not, they become invisible. That's where things start to break down. You see a man who has lived decades, built a career, gone through relationships, learned lessons the hard way. On paper, he has everything. But in reality, he walks into a conversation with hesitation. He filters his words too much. He tries to impress without realizing it. And slowly, without noticing, he loses the natural presence that once made him interesting. It doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle. It builds over time. And one of the biggest reasons is this quiet shift in mindset. Somewhere along the way, many men start believing they have to earn attention instead of simply allowing it to happen. They start thinking they need to prove their worth instead of living it. That shift changes everything. Because the moment you start trying to prove yourself, you stop being relaxed. And when you're not relaxed, your behavior changes, your tone changes, your body language tightens, your words become calculated instead of natural. And people feel that, especially women. They may not always be able to explain it, but they sense when a man is trying too hard. They sense when something is forced. And when that happens, attraction doesn't grow. It fades before it even begins. Now, think about this carefully. Imagine meeting someone new. You're curious, you're open. But instead of a natural interaction, the other person starts acting overly careful. They measure every sentence. They avoid saying anything bold or playful. They try to appear perfect. At first, it might seem polite, but after a few minutes, it starts to feel heavy, predictable, even a little exhausting. That's exactly what happens when a man unknowingly places someone on a pedestal. It doesn't look obvious from the outside. There's no dramatic moment where he says, "You are above me." But his actions communicate it clearly. The way he agrees too quickly, the way he avoids disagreement, the way he hesitates before speaking. All of it sends one message: I'm trying not to mess this up. And the moment that message is felt, the dynamic changes. Because attraction is not built on perfection. It's built on presence, on authenticity, on the ability to exist without constantly adjusting yourself to fit someone else's expectations. When a man forgets that, he slowly loses his edge. And the irony is, he often believes he's doing the right thing. He thinks being extra polite, extra careful, extra accommodating will increase his chances. But in reality, it does the opposite. It removes tension. It removes unpredictability. It removes the very elements that make interactions feel alive. What remains is something flat, something safe in the wrong way. And safety, when it lacks energy, becomes boredom. This is where many men get confused. They think attraction failed because of something external. Maybe she wasn't interested. Maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe there was someone else. But often the real reason is much simpler. The interaction never had space to breathe. It never had moments of spontaneity, no playful tension, no contrast, no sense of two individuals meeting as equals. Instead, it became one person trying to maintain an image while the other simply observed. And over time, that pattern repeats. Different conversations, different people, same outcome. Frustration builds, confusion grows, and eventually a man starts questioning his own value. But the issue was never his value, it was how he expressed it. There's a difference between having confidence and showing it, and that difference is where most mistakes happen. Confidence is not something you announce, it's something that's felt. It's in the pauses between your words. It's in the way you don't rush to fill silence. It's in the way you can disagree without tension. It's subtle, and because it's subtle, it's often misunderstood. Many men think confidence means saying the right things. But real confidence is not about saying more, it's about needing less. Less validation, less approval, less reassurance. When you don't need those things, your behavior naturally changes. You stop overthinking, you stop filtering every word, you stop trying to predict reactions. You become present. And presence is what creates connection. Now, consider the opposite. A man who constantly evaluates himself during a conversation. Am I saying the right thing? Did that sound good? Should I have said something else? That internal noise disconnects him from the moment. He's not really there anymore. And when you're not fully there, the interaction loses depth. It becomes surface level, no matter how good the words sound. This is why some men can say very little and still leave a strong impression, while others can talk for hours and be forgotten quickly. It's not about quantity, it's about quality of presence. And presence comes from comfort. Comfort with yourself, with your thoughts, with your imperfections. When you accept those things, you stop trying to hide them. And when you stop hiding, you start expressing naturally. That's when conversations shift. They feel lighter, more real, more engaging. There's room for humor, for spontaneity, for moments that aren't planned. And those moments are what people remember. Not the perfectly structured sentences, not the rehearsed lines, but the feeling of being in a moment that felt genuine. That's what creates attraction. And yet, many men move in the opposite direction. They try to control everything, to manage every detail, to avoid any possibility of making a mistake. But in doing so, they remove the very thing that make interactions human, imperfection. Because imperfection is what creates relatability. It shows that you're real, that you're not performing. And when someone feels that, they relax too. It becomes a shared experience instead of a performance. That's where connection begins. But when a man is focused on being perfect, he unintentionally creates distance, not because he lacks value, but because he hides it behind effort. Effort to impress, effort to avoid mistakes, effort to maintain an image. And that effort is felt. It creates tension. And tension without playfulness becomes pressure. Pressure makes people withdraw, slowly, quietly, without explanation. And the cycle continues. This is why awareness matters, not as a tool to change who you are, but as a way to remove what isn't necessary, to see where you're adding pressure when it's not needed, where you're holding back when you don't have to. Because most of the time, the solution is not to add something new, it's to stop doing what's already working against you, to remove the layers of overthinking, over-adjusting, and over-performing. And when those layers drop, something interesting happens. You start to feel lighter, more natural, more in control without trying to control anything. That's when your real personality starts to come through. Not the version shaped by expectations, but the one that exists underneath all of that. And that version is always more compelling, because it's real. It doesn't need to be maintained. It doesn't need constant effort. It simply exists, and people respond to that. They feel it in your tone, in your body language, in the way you carry yourself. It creates a different kind of presence, one that doesn't chase attention, but naturally draws it. And once that shift happens, interactions begin to change. They feel smoother, more effortless, not because you're doing more, but because you're doing less of what was holding you back. That's where everything starts to align. Not through force, not through strategy, but through clarity. Clarity of how your behavior shapes how others experience you. And when you see that clearly, you no longer need to guess what's going wrong. You understand it. And that understanding changes the way you move, speak, and respond without needing to think about it constantly. It becomes natural. And that's where real change begins. There's a moment in every interaction where things either begin to deepen or quietly fall apart. It doesn't happen loudly. There's no clear signal, no obvious shift that you can point to and say, this is where it changed. But something subtle moves beneath the surface, and from that point forward, everything feels slightly different. Most men miss that moment completely. They stay focused on what is being said, while the real shift happens in how it is being felt. And because they don't notice it, they continue in the same way, unaware that the energy has already changed. This is where confusion begins, because from the outside, everything can still look fine. The conversation continues, there are smiles, responses, even laughter. But underneath, the connection is no longer building, it's slowly flattening. And the reason often comes down to something very simple: the way a man responds when he feels a shift inside himself. You see, attraction is not just about how someone sees you, it's also about how you react to being seen. The moment you become aware that someone might be interested or that the interaction matters, your internal state changes. And that internal change reflects outward almost instantly. Your voice may become slightly tighter, your words more controlled, your reactions less spontaneous. It's subtle, but it's enough. Because the moment you start adjusting yourself too much, you stop being unpredictable. And unpredictability is one of the key elements that keeps interactions engaging. Not chaos, not randomness, but a natural sense of not knowing exactly what comes next. When that disappears, everything becomes easy to read. And when something is too easy to read, it loses its tension. That's where interest begins to fade. A lot of men think consistency alone is enough. They believe being stable, polite, and agreeable will naturally build attraction over time. But consistency without variation becomes monotony. And monotony doesn't create emotional engagement. It creates comfort without excitement. And comfort without excitement often leads to disinterest. This is why balance matters in ways that are rarely discussed. Not balance between good and bad or right and wrong, but balance between predictability and surprise, between calmness and energy, between seriousness and playfulness. When one side dominates too much, the dynamic weakens. For example, when a man becomes too predictable, every interaction starts to feel the same. The same tone, the same responses, the same pacing. There's no contrast. And without contrast, nothing stands out. Everything blends together. On the other hand, when there is natural variation, even small moments feel more alive. A shift in tone, a pause, a playful comment that breaks the pattern. These small changes create movement, and movement keeps attention. But movement cannot exist if you are constantly monitoring yourself, because self-monitoring slows everything down. It interrupts flow. Instead of responding naturally, you start evaluating. Instead of expressing, you start filtering. And once that happens, the interaction becomes less about connection and more about performance. Performance creates distance, because no matter how good it is, it never feels completely real. People sense when something is being managed too carefully. They may not call it out, but they feel it. And feeling it is enough to change how they respond. This is why some interactions feel effortless, while others feel heavy, even if the words are similar. The difference is not in what is said, but in how it is delivered. Delivery comes from internal state. If you are relaxed, your delivery is fluid. If you are tense, your delivery becomes controlled. And control, when it's excessive, removes warmth. It creates a subtle barrier. Not visible, but present. That barrier prevents deeper connection from forming, because connection requires openness. Not complete vulnerability, but a level of ease that allows both people to feel comfortable expressing themselves. When one person is too controlled, the other person mirrors that. The interaction becomes safe, but distant. And distance, even when small, accumulates over time. It turns what could have been engaging into something forgettable. Now consider another layer, attention. Not the kind of attention that comes from trying to impress, but the kind that comes from being genuinely present. There's a difference between listening and waiting to speak. Many people confuse the two. They nod, they respond, but internally they are preparing their next sentence, thinking about what to say next, how to respond, how to keep the conversation going. That internal activity pulls them out of the moment. And when you aren't fully in the moment, your attention becomes divided. Divided attention weakens connection, because connection thrives on focus. When someone feels fully heard, fully seen, something shifts. They relax, they open up more. The interaction deepens without effort. But when attention is partial, even slightly, it creates a subtle disconnect. It's not enough to end the interaction, but it's enough to prevent it from growing. This is why presence is often underestimated, because it doesn't look like an action. It looks like doing nothing. But in reality, it's one of the most powerful elements in any interaction. Being present means you are not rushing, not forcing, not trying to steer the moment constantly. You allow things to unfold. And when you allow that, the interaction develops its own rhythm. That rhythm is what makes conversations feel natural. When rhythm is broken, everything feels off. Even if the words are correct, something feels misaligned. That misalignment often comes from trying too hard to control the direction, trying to lead every moment, instead of allowing some moments to simply exist. Because not every moment needs to be filled. Silence, when comfortable, can be more powerful than constant talking. It creates space. Space allows emotions to settle, to build, to be felt. Without space, everything becomes continuous noise, and noise over time reduces impact. Think about how music works. If every note is played at the same intensity, without pauses, without variation, it becomes overwhelming. But when there are pauses, shifts, changes in tempo, the music feels alive. Interactions follow the same principle. They need variation. They need moments of stillness as much as moments of energy. But most people are uncomfortable with stillness. They rush to fill it, because stillness feels uncertain, and uncertainty makes them react. That reaction often leads to over-talking, over-explaining, or over-adjusting, which brings the interaction back into control mode. And once control dominates, flow disappears. Flow is what makes interactions memorable. It's what creates those moments where time feels different, where conversation moves effortlessly, where both people feel engaged without trying. But flow cannot be forced. It emerges when resistance is low. Resistance comes from overthinking, from trying to manage every outcome. Reducing resistance means letting go of the need to control every detail. Not completely, but enough to allow natural movement. And when that happens, something changes. You become less focused on outcome and more focused on experience. That shift alters everything. Because when you are focused on experience, you respond to what is actually happening, not what you think should happen. Your reactions become more aligned with the moment. That alignment is what creates authenticity. Authenticity is not about saying everything that comes to mind. It's about expressing what feels natural without excessive filtering. When authenticity is present, interactions feel real. And when something feels real, it becomes engaging. Because people are drawn to what feels genuine. Not perfect, not polished, but genuine. Perfection creates distance. Genuineness creates connection. And connection is what sustains interest over time. Without it, everything remains surface level, no matter how impressive it looks initially. Because surface level interactions have a limit. They can only go so far before they start to lose depth. Depth comes from moments that are not planned, from reactions that are not rehearsed, from expressions that are not calculated. Those moments cannot exist if everything is controlled. Control removes spontaneity, and spontaneity is what brings life into interaction. It creates unpredictability in a natural way, not forced, not exaggerated, but real. And real is always more impactful than constructed. This is why the smallest shifts in behavior can create the biggest changes in outcome, not because they are dramatic, but because they affect the foundation of how interaction unfolds. When the foundation changes, everything built on it changes as well, and often those changes are not visible immediately. They show over time, in how conversations feel, in how people respond, in how interactions develop or fade. Understanding this requires attention, not just to others, but to yourself, to your reactions, your internal shifts, your patterns, because those internal elements shape everything external. And once you become aware of them, you start to see patterns that were previously invisible. Patterns in how you respond when things go well. Patterns in how you react when there is uncertainty. Patterns in how you adjust yourself without realizing it. Seeing those patterns is where awareness begins. And awareness on its own starts to create change, Not forced change, but natural adjustment. Because once you see something clearly, it becomes difficult to ignore. You don't need constant effort to fix it. The act of seeing it already shifts your behavior. Slowly, subtly, but consistently. And over time, those small shifts compound. They reshape how you move through interactions, how you communicate, how you connect, without needing to rely on strategies or techniques. Because at that point, your behavior is no longer driven by guesswork, it's guided by understanding. And understanding removes confusion. It replaces uncertainty with clarity. Not perfect clarity, but enough to move without hesitation. And when hesitation decreases, presence increases. When presence increases, connection strengthens. And when connection strengthens, interactions naturally begin to feel different, more fluid, more engaging, more real. Not because something was added, but because something unnecessary was removed. And that removal creates space. Space for authenticity, space for flow, space for moments that don't need to be controlled to have impact. That's where everything begins to shift, quietly but powerfully. There is a difference between being noticed and being felt. Most people confuse the two and spend their time trying to become more noticeable, more impressive, more visible. But attention alone does not create depth. It only creates exposure. And exposure without depth fades quickly. What actually lasts is impact. And impact is not created by trying harder. It is created by being aligned with yourself in a way that does not require constant adjustment. This is where many interactions quietly fall apart without anyone realizing it. On the surface, everything appears normal. Conversation continues, responses are exchanged. There may even be moments of laughter or agreement. But underneath that surface, something essential is missing. There is no grounding force, no sense of stable presence that holds the interaction together. And without that, everything becomes temporary. A lot of people believe the solution is to say more, do more, or express more. But in reality, excess often creates the opposite effect. The more someone tries to fill space, the less meaningful their presence becomes. Because meaning is not created through volume, it is created through intention. When intention is unclear, even strong communication loses its weight. You can see this in everyday interactions. A person might talk for several minutes, sharing stories, opinions, experiences, trying to keep things engaging, but if their internal state is scattered, the listener may still feel disconnected. On the other hand, someone else may say very little, but their presence feels steady. Their words land differently. There is no rush behind them, no pressure in their delivery, no hidden attempt to manage perception. That difference is not in skill, it is in state. State determines everything. When a person is internally steady, their external behavior naturally aligns. They don't need to overcorrect, they don't need to constantly adjust tone or expression, they are simply present. And presence carries its own weight. But when someone is internally unstable, even in subtle ways, they begin to compensate externally. They may not notice it, but they start filling silence too quickly, agreeing too easily, reacting too fast, or trying to maintain constant flow in conversation. This creates imbalance, because real connection requires space. Space allows the other person to process, respond, and feel the interaction, rather than just move through it. Without space, everything becomes compressed. Compressed interaction feels rushed, even when nothing is actually rushed. It feels slightly forced, even when the intentions are good. And over time, that feeling creates distance, not because something went wrong, but because something essential was missing from the beginning. Stillness. Stillness is often misunderstood. Many assume it means doing nothing or being passive. But in reality, stillness is internal control without external tension. It is the ability to remain unchanged by pressure. Not frozen, not disconnected, but steady. A steady presence changes how everything around it behaves. When someone is steady, others naturally slow down around them. They become more open, more expressive, more comfortable. There is no need for excessive effort to keep things alive. The interaction sustains itself. But when someone is unstable internally, even slightly, the interaction becomes reactive. It shifts based on external cues rather than internal grounding. This creates inconsistency, and inconsistency weakens trust in subtle ways. Trust is not always about big actions or major decisions. It is often about micro experiences, how someone responds in small moments, how they handle pauses, how they react when there is uncertainty. These small signals build the overall feeling of reliability or unpredictability, and people are constantly reading those signals without realizing it. This is why trying too hard often produces the opposite of what is intended, because effort that is not grounded in calm awareness becomes visible in unintended ways. It shows in timing, in tone, in pacing, in reaction speed. And those details matter more than words. Words carry meaning, but behavior carries truth. If words and behavior are not aligned, people always believe behavior. This is where many misunderstandings begin. A person may believe they are coming across one way while the other person is experiencing something completely different, not because of intention, but because of expression. Expression is shaped by internal state, not just choice. That is why awareness of internal patterns becomes so important. When a person begins to notice how they shift internally in different situations, they start to gain control over those shifts, not by suppressing them, but by understanding them. For example, when attention is received, some people become overly aware of themselves. They start monitoring their words, adjusting their behavior, trying to maintain a certain image. This internal monitoring creates tension, and tension disrupts natural flow. Flow is the state where actions are not forced, but also not random. They are responsive. They adapt without losing stability. In flow, there is no separation between thought and action. Everything feels continuous. But flow cannot exist when internal monitoring is too high, because monitoring introduces delay. Instead of responding, the mind evaluates. Instead of expressing, it calculates, and that calculation removes spontaneity. Without spontaneity, interactions lose warmth. Warmth is not created by saying the right things. It is created by being fully in the moment without overthinking the impression being made. This is why some of the most memorable interactions feel effortless. There is no visible structure behind them, no clear strategy, just natural exchange. But natural does not mean uncontrolled. It means unforced control. There is a subtle difference between the two. Uncontrolled behavior is reactive and scattered. Unforced control is stable and adaptive. One is driven by impulse, the other by awareness. And awareness is what allows flexibility without collapse. When awareness is present, a person can adjust without losing themselves. They can respond without overcorrecting. They can remain consistent without becoming rigid. This balance is rare because most people lean toward extremes, either too controlled or too loose, either too careful or too careless. But neither extreme supports strong connection. Connection requires a middle space where behavior is stable but not stiff, expressive but not chaotic, present but not overwhelmed. This middle space is where natural confidence exists. Not the kind of confidence that is displayed loudly, but the kind that is felt quietly. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It does not depend on reaction. It simply exists. And because it exists without effort, it does not create pressure in others. Instead, it creates ease. Ease is one of the most powerful emotional states in interaction. When someone feels ease around another person, their guard naturally lowers. They become more open, more responsive, more themselves. But ease cannot be forced. It can only be created through stability. And stability comes from within. Not from external validation, not from success alone, but from internal alignment. When internal alignment is missing, external success often feels unstable. It may exist, but it does not translate into presence. That is why some individuals with significant achievements still struggle in personal interactions, because achievement and presence are not the same system. One is external structure, the other is internal expression, and internal expression determines how external reality is experienced by others. This is also why over-explaining oneself rarely improves perception, because explanation often comes from insecurity rather than clarity. When someone feels the need to constantly justify themselves, it creates imbalance in how they are perceived. Clarity does not require constant reinforcement. It is felt through consistency. When behavior remains consistent, explanation becomes unnecessary. People begin to trust what they observe more than what they are told. And observation is continuous. It does not stop after one moment. It accumulates. Every interaction adds another layer of understanding. That is why small patterns matter more than big moments. A single impressive moment can be memorable, but consistent behavior shapes perception, and perception eventually becomes reality in social interaction. Not objective reality, but experienced reality. The reality of how someone is perceived, felt, and responded to. Once this is understood, it becomes clear why over-efforting creates diminishing returns, because effort that is not aligned with presence becomes noise. It fills space without adding depth. And when space is filled with noise, subtle signals get lost. But when space is used wisely, even silence becomes meaningful. Silence is not absence, it is structure. It gives weight to what is said. It allows emotional processing. It creates rhythm in interaction. Without silence, everything becomes flat. And flat interaction cannot sustain long-term interest. This is why timing matters as much as content. When something is said is often as important as what is said, because timing affects emotional reception. A well-timed pause can create more impact than a long explanation. A calm response can carry more authority than a loud one. A steady tone can communicate more confidence than a forceful statement. These elements are subtle, but they define experience. And experience is what people remember. Not arguments, not explanations, not attempts to impress, but experience. How they felt in your presence. That is what stays. And that is what determines whether connection grows or fades. When behavior consistently creates ease, clarity, and presence, interaction naturally deepens, not through effort, but through alignment. And alignment is not something that is added, it is something that is uncovered when unnecessary layers are removed. Layers of overthinking, overreacting, over-explaining, and over-controlling. When those layers reduce, what remains is something much simpler, a more direct expression of self. And that simplicity carries strength, because it does not rely on performance, it relies on being. And being, when stable, is enough to create impact without forcing anything at all.